Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about different roles and responsibilities. We've had a lot of overlap, but a lot of people wear different hats in the hobby. I think I've always tried to gravitate toward things I like to do and things I'm good at, and most people should do that too. So thanks, sponsors, Topps Panini Upper Deck, Heritage Auctions, Hug of the Sky Auctions, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication. Rich, you actually teased this topic by asking me of all the different hats that I wore, what did I like?
I've gotten the impression from listening to the podcast and from knowing you that while you were very good at it, you really didn't want to be a CEO. That really wasn't where your heart was. You're good at it. You had to do it because you own a company, but you would have been happier going to shows, pricing cards, doing research. I think you would have been happier than that than trying to figure out where at the peak 183 people, how do you make sure 183 people keep getting paid?
I've always said I'm not a control freak. I don't have to be in control, but I don't like to be controlled. So I don't want to be in the situation where somebody else is the CEO and telling me to do things that I don't agree with if I think I know best. And it was my nickel and the buck stopped here. And so I didn't enjoy it in the sense of the daily duties of being a CEO, but I would have been absolutely miserable with somebody else doing it. Even if somebody would have been pretty good, I would have been looking over their shoulder. I've talked about that. And so I felt it was necessary, but you're right. I didn't really enjoy it. I felt like I was getting kicked upstairs to do things that I could do, but I didn't enjoy as much. I got to talk about the cards, but I never got to touch the cards. The way you put it is that I was a price guide editor, and really, you didn't mention it, but I really liked being a price guide analyst. It's like people don't understand the difference between an author and a publisher is very different. A publisher can be a business role, and an author is a substantive, content-oriented role. I like to be with the content. I wasn't trying to look at financial spreadsheets as CEO. I was trying to set the strategic direction for the company. That's what I enjoyed. And then making sure that the funding was there to be able to fund these new initiatives that we did. And for a long time, we did that. And there just came a time for me to find the next owner. Even then, Rich, I'm enjoying pricing my cards when I put them up on eBay and on ComC. In fact, I've not belabored this, but I have a huge advantage on ComC when I put cards on ComC. And I know that people are thinking you put a bunch of cards up there, it must take you a long time to put prices. I am super fast at putting prices of cards in when I post something to ComC, whether it's 100 cards or 1,000 cards. I knock them out really quickly. That's the part I really enjoy. John Newman said, how do you know? I said, I paid $1 for each one of them or less. I'm not going to get burned too bad, but still, you don't want to price them too high or too low. And I enjoy the long tail aspect of pricing the cards. But being the price guide editor or the senior editor, whatever, the final editor, it means you've got to make the call when two analytical reports could come in conflict, that East Coast, West Coast, or whatever, you've got to resolve the fact that there's not a symphony of data, but there's some outliers and really getting to the bottom of what the price ought to be beyond the data. Certainly, we're trying to be empirical as much as possible. That I really enjoy because it's like a puzzle. You've worked in a card shop.
I owned a card shop. I managed a card shop. I worked in a card shop.
I didn't hate it, but I wasn't that good at it. Actually, when I was working the store, I would be sorting cards. Then when somebody came in, I'd help them. But it was all vintage in the day, pretty much. So it wasn't as many cards, but it was still a lot.
At card stores, you have to do something to keep the time going because in most card stores, you're not going to have a constant influx of customers all day long.
The whole reason for having a card store when Gervis and I started, he'd already gotten going, and then Wayne came in. But the whole thing was just like we were talking about Mr. Mint. His presence at the show was to buy, not to sell. And our presence in that strip mall and Lockwood Mall before we were at the Webb's Chapel place and where Gervis was on Adelia, these different shop iterations, they were positioned to buy collections. We wanted to sell, but we really wanted to buy. When you bought a collection, when Wayne bought a collection, I think he put it in the back. But if Gervis or I bought it, we started working it immediately and trying to get it out for sale. And we were all collectors at that point too. So if there was something interesting that came in, we could divvy it up and say, we're going to just split this 3 ways or 2 ways, whatever it was. if we needed it for type cards for me. By then I had most of the complete sets of sets that I wanted. When I was a collector, I just look back and I shouldn't be hard on people because I also followed the herd in the 70s. I tried to complete a set of Gaudis, and I did because that's what you were supposed to do. Now, the fact that my dad had some, that was a positive. Same thing with play balls, 52 tops. You weren't a serious collector if you didn't have your want list and were pretty close to being done with 52 tops. And then there were the regionals and all those things. And where I diverged is when I started getting into more and more obscure stuff, and then realizing that I felt I had an affinity for pricing and knowing the relative values. And that meant setting aside being even a collector for the most part, because I basically sold a lot of my sets when I was starting the company.
How about I disagree with you? I think being a collector helps you price all the oddball. I think being a collector is the key there because you knew what it was to try to find these cards.
I'm not denying that. I hope I didn't give that impression. The fact that I was a serious collector and had a want list, I haven't had a want list for 50 years now, but I used to have a want list, and I knew which cards and which sets were more difficult than the others. And other people did too, but it never been put pen to paper of, okay, if this is $5, then this is $10 and this is $20, and that's what they're selling for.
I'm going to tell you something funny. I ID cards at ComSync, and the other day I ID'd a dandy Paul Smith card.
But it's a tough card. Very tough.
That's a very tough card. I don't know what it's priced at. I haven't followed to see what it was. I'm thinking, all right, this is a really tough card. I wonder if the person even knows how tough it is.
All the Pirates are a little bit tougher, I think, of the dandies, because it was a Cleveland mainly thing.
Cleveland had probably a bigger collecting base than the Pirates in those days.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting because Pittsburgh is now an up-and-coming city, and Cleveland is okay, but not where Pittsburgh is now. And that's the reverse of where it was when you were at Bowling Green.
Yeah. I went over to Pittsburgh a few times. They had a couple shows there that were nearly as big as anything in the Cleveland show. Strongsville was coming on the radar then. I'm realizing when we talk about these things, I think about things in a different way, partly because I'm just trying to think back in my memory. And I'm trying to think when I was the co-promoter along with Gervis of some shows back in the 70s, what did I actually do? I think I need to apologize to Gervis. I think he did all the work and I was like the co-promoter, and I can't even think what I did. I was there on the day of the show. I'm sure I helped set up, but he did almost all the heavy lifting. Now, on the other hand, it's not like we split the profits. It wasn't a money-making venture, but he rented the room. He secured the tables, and I think he signed up the people. I'm just trying to figure what I did. I was in the store for most of those early years because he'd have one Saturday and I'd have the next, and we could divvy it up 50-50. But in the shows, I just don't remember other than, I probably circulated around, and I knew a lot of the people and all that. When we're talking about the roles we've had within the hobby, I don't think we belabored the difference between being a magazine price guide editor or analyst and a book price guide editor or analyst. They're really pretty different in terms of the way you have to approach them and the deadlines and the pressure. And the book is so many times bigger. The magazine are the most important cards in the most important sets, but the book was what was really hazardous to our health, I think, doing the different books. Do you agree? And who else besides you and me is in that fraternity?
Dad hits at the football books.
So he would have that same. And did Grant do basketball a couple times?
I don't think Grant really did basketball. You and I did basketball, and I think I did more basketball than Grant. And then Al did a lot of. Mike did the first couple, and then Al did hockey from that point on.
Okay.
The almanac was pretty much 90 days of really intense work, and I would still do my regular job, and then I'd come in Saturdays and maybe spend an hour or two after work every night. Eventually, it was not that hard because I knew the players. I had good guidance. I was tracing the market. It really wasn't super hard. It was just the almanac. It was more that it was big.
I've asked people to take a page of the magazine and sub-vocalize everything it says on a price guide page and see how long that takes you. Just to read it off. Ken Griffey, 40 cents to $1. Barry Bonds, 50 cents to $1.25. Just read everything that's on the page and see how long it takes you just to read the page, and then multiply by how many pages are in that magazine's price guide. And you'll freak out and how long it is just to read it if you sub-vocalize. Not talking about scanning it. Then do the same thing with a book. And those almanacs, you would just absolutely freak out. You would think there aren't enough hours in the day and night to get that done. But that's not how I did it, because otherwise it couldn't be done if you were doing it that slowly. And some of the sets were that slow, but many of them were not that tough. They just weren't high demand sets.
1977 Seattle Mariner team issue set. There's nobody in that set that's really explosive in terms of pricing. So if the set price doesn't change, you probably don't even have to change the singles. You just want to scan it for maybe 30 seconds, but you don't have to spend more than a minute on a set like that.
Yeah, but there's thousands of sets. It's thousands of minutes, and you've taken the easiest example.
That's the point. You figured out which sets you really needed to focus on. 80% of your time is going to be spent on the 20% that matter the most.
Nowadays, the price guide attempts only look at the 20%. And our old company is the only one that even purports to do the long tail, I think. And a lot of it's not as updated as it could be.
But it's hard. It's so voluminous. You need another person. If you're
or two or three or four.
So, yeah, I'll just stick with one. You definitely need at least one more person.
I was doing this in another episode. I thought, you know what? We'd get done with one, and then it was time to start over again almost. In the cycle of during the year, you'd go from one, you'd take a little bit of a break, and then you have to jump back in A to Z on the next sport. I'm talking about the books, not the magazines. The magazines, we had a lot of division of labor and a lot more data. The data was more concentrated because they were the more high demand cards, and we were tracking them every month. But the book sets that were annual, you're trying to figure out what happened since last year. That was hard.
I kept track of a lot of players. I didn't view. And you knew who was doing well.
Right. And we knew who the sources were, the dealers that handled that stuff that were trustworthy. Like you said, if they're still selling it at a reasonable rate at the same exact price, then that's a breath of fresh air. That means if the prices are still valid, why make work for ourselves?
Yeah, and a lot of stuff would get done during the year. For a couple of years, Wayne sat across from me, and he would be doing stuff for the Vintage magazine. He'd say, "What about this?" We'd look, "Oh, let me fix that." And it didn't take me that long to fix something while I was there. So I knew I didn't have to do it again since I had already fixed it. One year at the National, I forgot, one of our book guys comes up to me, has a list, and he literally had a list of 30 things. It turned out we had covered 28 of them, but he didn't even know. And he goes, "You really do work during the year?" And I said, "Yeah, we actually do the work all year long."
You have to.
And I had 28 of his 30 corrections were already, or pricing suggestions were already done. And he goes,
but the reason we got that many corrections is that people knew, again, we're talking about 20, 25 years ago, people knew that we were going to take it seriously and get it fixed.
They knew that if they had something specific, we would pay attention.
Exactly.